Natural disasters and national emergencies can strike anywhere and anytime, with little or no warning, leaving chaos and destruction in their wake. But amidst the devastation is a beacon of hope and a symbol of unwavering support, the Red Castle of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers.
We always live kind of in disbelief that it's not going to happen to us.
We're protecting American citizens. We're giving them the tools to help them protect themselves.
When you are affected by a disaster, it can be very traumatizing.
Our sole intent is to get folks back to their pre-disaster way of life.
Welcome to Corps Chronicles, Stories from the Heartland, where we bring you the history of the Kansas City District, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. This month, we'll learn about the vital role our district plays in disaster readiness, response, and recovery. Join us as we explore the incredible stories of the unsung heroes who stand ready to step in and help, no matter where or when disaster strikes.
I'm Jed Knieven. I'm the Chief of Readiness and Contingency Operations here for the Kansas City District.
My name is Rick Wexelbaum. I'm an emergency management specialist with the Kansas City District Corps of Engineers, and I'm responsible for the National Emergency Preparedness Program.
Mike Doolin, Emergency Management Specialist with the Kansas City District Corps of Engineers. I'm the Flood Control and Coastal Emergencies Program Manager.
Diana McCoy, I'm the Chief of Public Affairs for the Kansas City District. Prior to coming into this role, I was an emergency management specialist in our Readiness and Contingency Operations office.
My name is Vyra Dobbins. My position was emergency management specialist.
My name is Marjorie DeBrott, and when I started in emergency management, I was the Natural Disaster Program Manager. And at a later time, I became the Chief of Emergency Management in Kansas City District.
The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers' mission is to deliver vital engineering solutions in collaboration with our partners to secure our nation, energize our economy, and reduce disaster risk. Within the larger mission of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is a lesser-known but vitally important emergency operations mission.
I think the mission is really important. It's not a mission that people would easily identify with or associate with the Corps of Engineers. When you think of the Corps of Engineers, you don't think, oh, well, these people are responsible for putting a temporary roof on my house or being a first responder type of person when something major has impacted my life.
Every year, hundreds of U.S. Army Corps of Engineers employees volunteer to deploy all across the United States and the world to respond to national emergencies and natural disasters and aid in response and recovery efforts. In the Kansas City District, a small but highly trained team stands ready to assist when an emergency or disaster occurs.
Emergency management or readiness and contingency ops, our primary responsibility is to prepare the district to respond and recover from a whole variety of disasters. And then we also plan to support the enterprise nationwide when they need assistance during disasters.
The responsibilities of the district's Readiness and Contingency Operations missions can be broken into three categories: readiness, response, and recovery.
Readiness involves a lot of things. So there's a lot of planning efforts, and with planning comes coordination. Coordination is probably the most important thing that we do so that we, when we need a friend, we have a friend that we can phone. We're not making friends during the disaster. We're trying to make them ahead of time.
The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers works closely with local and state governments, as well as other federal agencies like the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, to plan for potential emergencies and disasters by providing training and crafting emergency plans.
We work alongside with the states when they are preparing some of their disaster response plans.
For the Kansas City District's area of responsibility, coordination, planning, and training at the state level is primarily with the states of Missouri and Kansas.
So we communicate often with Missouri SEMA and the same thing with Kansas Division of Emergency Management, obviously on the Kansas side. But we're in contact with them throughout the year. They are appreciative and supportive of all of the planning that goes on, mutual planning that goes on with USACE in this district and the state, as well as USACE's planning with FEMA and FEMA planning with the state and so on.
But readiness is also making sure the district and its employees are ready to respond if needed.
Readiness also involves an element of having personnel who are trained and prepared to go.
When it comes to readiness, there's a lot of training that takes place in the readiness phase, making sure that people are prepared to respond. So making sure that your equipment is ready to go, that you have equipment to take with you, that you are ready physically to go, because you train and you train and you train, and then finally something happens and you're ready.
The goal of the readiness phase is for the Kansas City District and its partners to know what to do and who to contact in the event of an emergency or disaster. But this doesn't happen overnight. It takes a lot of time and effort to build relationships across all levels of government and among many communities in the district's area of responsibility.
I'd rather not even imagine what it would be like to meet somebody for the first time when a disaster happens. I mean, that's the worst day of their life. And now you're there trying to provide help and you don't know them from Adam. So these relationships that we have absolutely help in that process, cutting through the bureaucracy or red tape and so on. And folks get to know who folks are. I mean, I might be the program manager for the national disasters, but they know me as Rick. Rick's here. Okay, he's the door to the Corps, or at least the door to the district.
Having positive working relationships already established is key when a disaster does occur. National emergencies and natural disasters can vary in scale and scope in terms of the amount of damage done, the duration of the event, and the recovery efforts required. There is virtually no natural disaster that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has not or will not respond to.
We can respond to tornadoes, hurricanes, wildfires, tsunamis, volcanoes, all the stuff that you hope that you're not a part of and are high consequence, but they're low probability. USACE, Corps of Engineers in this district can provide a piece in helping folks return back to their pre-disaster ways of life.
During response and recovery efforts, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers works under two primary authorities to provide assistance: Public Law 8499 and Emergency Support Function Number 3 of the Stafford Act under the National Response Framework. The Kansas City District has a strong connection to these two authorities. Marge DeBrott, a former Kansas City District Emergency Management Specialist, who later went on to work for both USACE headquarters and FEMA, helped write both.
So I was put on special programs and helped with rewriting the Public Law 8499, which is the levee program, the disaster response. Then I worked for headquarters following 9/11. Headquarters loaned me to the then Office of Homeland Security. It was before it became the Department of Homeland Security. And I was TDY for FEMA and the Office of Homeland Security for about 3 years, writing the National Response Plan and this thing called the National Incident Management System.
Marge served as the district's chief of emergency management before working for USACE headquarters. Her time with both the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and FEMA has had a lasting impact not only on how the federal government responds to national emergencies and natural disasters, but also on the people she worked with.
Marge would eventually go on to work at headquarters. She was one of the first ESF-3 permanent cadre folks we had in the Corps. And then she would end up at FEMA, and she eventually retired from FEMA. She was one of the principal authors of what we call the National Response Plan with the Corps. So wonderful mentor and a wonderful EM professional in her whole career.
I'm proud that I was able to help build a program in Kansas City District that headquarters would look to. I mean, they came to us for help, and that made me proud.
Many districts in the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers have an Emergency Operations Center, or EOC. When an emergency or disaster occurs within a district's area of responsibility, they will likely activate their EOC. Each district runs their EOC differently. At the Kansas City District, it all depends on the specific event.
Whenever the district is identified to respond to an event, so if there's flooding on the Missouri River, we activate our Emergency Operations Center. And it really kind of depends on the severity of the event and how many people are required to respond. If it's an event that's expected to be, just a few days, a very short duration, more than likely we would not activate the EOC. We may go to what's considered partial activation. So we're monitoring and we're getting people engaged as needed.
There are 4 levels of activation of the EOC at the Kansas City District. For longer duration or more severe events, the EOC might go into full activation.
We have 4 levels of activation. Level 4 is normal operations. So today is a normal op. We don't have any emergencies that we're working here locally. Level 3 is what we call emergency watch. Emergency watch allows us to bring in funding. It's kind of seed money for the emergency. It also allows us to let the district know that we've got our eyes on something that may develop into a flood that we have to respond to. So it acts as part of it. Changing that activation level is part of our warning order to the district to be prepared to help us. And then level 2 is partial activation. And that's really when we start to augment our staff in the EOC and when we're actually in a full-fledged flood emergency. We primarily stay at level 2 partial activation. And basically it's augmented staff and augmented hours. And then level 1 is 24-hour ops.
The Emergency Operations Center is a communication hub during an emergency or disaster. Having a well-functioning EOC allows the district to effectively communicate with partners, stakeholders, and the public during an event.
We have a great facility and we have great teams. So it's, the one thing I'll say about response in general in the district is Kansas City, we attack it as a team sport. It involves every element of the district, and it's important that we take it as a priority and we execute it as a priority.
Once a disaster or emergency is over, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is trained and ready to assist in recovery efforts. Whether this is assisting FEMA in recovery activities or providing assistance to communities and levee districts after a flood or coastal emergency, the employees of USACE stand ready to help.
You have a dedicated team that's sitting there thinking about what could happen, right? And whether that be a high probability event or a low probability event, we put some thought into it. And so that's our job on a day-to-day basis, is to think about those things. Most of what we do is behind the scenes. So a lot of times if we're not activated, people don't know we're here, and that's okay. That allows us to do the work we need to do.
For the Readiness and Contingency Operations team at the Kansas City District, this means helping communities return to a sense of normalcy after an emergency or disaster.
Coming in every day knowing that, if a disaster hits, you're giving back to your country, you're giving back to your neighbors, helping people out after they've had the worst day of their life.
At the end of the day, we want the folks that were impacted by the disaster to be returned back to their pre-disaster way of life as soon as possible.
Thank you for listening to Corps Chronicles, Stories from the Heartland. We hope you learned something new today. Tune in next week to hear the next episode.